for 5 minutes.
Well, first of all, let me thank the director for years of service to this nation. We don't often get a chance to speak positively to a person that is young, but has a long history of service. We thank you for having that kind of record and being expert enough to have been on this side, the legislative side, and knowing the difficulty we have of trying to put a budget together or assessing the executive's budget, because the whole question is about revenue, and to be able to ensure that we have enough revenue coming in. So first I want to make a point. I like gospel music, and in the aftermath of the George Floyd horrific killing, a young black boy either sang or wrote a song that said, "I just want to live." It was a passionate, emotional song. I commend any of you to pull it up on YouTube or however. And it is a theme that I want to use, that we are not trying to create an atmosphere where American families, no matter where they started in life, are just surviving, just barely making it. What we're looking for is the capacity to say that you are thriving. So my first question is, give me a sense, not very long because my time is short, of our revenue source to be able to match the president's vision and budget that makes us feel comfortable that we could go forward.
Well, one, this budget would pay for all the president's new investments to help families thrive, as you say, to have childcare, to have paid leave, to have universal pre-K in this country, and also would achieve $3.2 trillion in deficit reduction because he does ask the wealthiest in this country to pay more. So, in some of our proposals, Congresswoman, not even back to levels before the 2017 tax law. So we're providing a path to show people we can invest in the American people and also achieve deficit reduction.
So what you would be doing is that American families would be thriving as opposed to just surviving. That would be the goal of a president's budget.
I would hope that's all our goals as we sit in these seats, and we have put forth proposals we think meet the bill to allow middle class and working families to thrive.
One of the numbers I have is corporations paying their fair share. And every time we use that terminology, it's like we're attacking corporate America. And this is one country that corporations flock to be able to come and build their growth. And I have a number that says if big corporations pay their fair share, and the numbers may vary, we get in an extra $2.2 trillion. And again, that may be a number that can move. The budget includes an important proposal for so-called billionaires' minimum income tax, which would not be painful, but would require the top 1% of households or those worth over $100 million to pay a minimum tax of 25%. So let me pose the question of how extensive will our commitment be to protecting Medicare and Medicaid, two different lines of payment. Not payment, but two different lines of treatment, if you will, Medicare versus Medicaid. But how would we strengthen both of these in the president's budget?
Medicare, the proposal would sustain Medicare and improve insolvency indefinitely. Again, the wealthiest, top 1%, would go from paying 3.8% to 5%, a 1.2% difference. And that would take the Medicare trust fund into solvency indefinitely. That's not the president's numbers. Those are the CMS actuarialists, the professionals, the career team that look at that. And so we believe that expanded health care, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act is good for this country and good for the people of the country. And we have a budget that would expand upon that.
Part of thriving is good health care, which has really been an Achilles heel for our people for a long time. With this few seconds that I have, let me just collectively get you to give a collective answer. We want better housing. We want child care. That has been one of my issues. and housing, affordable housing, made a commitment. Give me that as you close your remarks, and I have no more time, on the housing, ability, and childcare.
Programs, housing, childcare, healthcare, energy costs, all those things that middle class and working families need help with in this country. This budget would do it and pay for it.
Right. I think that is clearly, Mr. Chairman, a budget that has the word thriving versus surviving, and I'm standing with the president's budget, and we will find a way to move forward on moving America and America's families forward. Lastly, I will just say, moving people out of poverty. I want people who are poor to know that we are concerned about their status of poverty. I thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah for questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Director Young, so I've only been here 2 terms, so relatively on the lower tenure. And other than witnesses that we've invited specifically, we'll obviously have a natural reason to chat with them. You're the only person that's ever really reached out. I'm sorry for this week on not being able to make that call scheduled, but I sincerely do appreciate it. You may be able to tell we have massive catastrophic cold this week, to which my wife refers to as a man cold, where she also prophesies that everybody has to know about it too, which I guess I'm actually doing and fulfilling that prophecy at this very moment. But I do appreciate that, and I look forward to as much dialogue as possible in any moments that we get to do that. That means a lot. Back to my cold. I get to that point where when you have weeks like this, it's just a no-nonsense type of moment. And to me, it's been mentioned several times. I've been really disappointed in a few weeks leading up to it, but the weeks after we passed the Fiscal Commission Act, to see so much of the fear mongering going on about, trying to get something done. Like, we all recognize that we have a massive problem if we don't get ahead of our debt and deficit woes that have persisted for 25 plus years. And it's been really, really frustrating to watch. I don't really need you to expound on it. This isn't something you'd ever vote on. It may not even be heavily involved. I don't know to what extent. But my ask to you would be, could you help cut through? Would you be willing to commit to cut through all of the nonsense that's going on? The fear-mongering about Social Security, and it's just a cut to these programs. It's not. And the fear-mongering also from the right that this is just a way to sneak a way into increased tax. None of us want to sneak any taxes. My questions are all about tax. Would you be willing to commit to at least dialoguing in a non-political tone among the folks that you interact with?
Congressman, you have my commitment to do that. Look, there are different ways to dialogue. I appreciate some of the hearings have, it's 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes of back and forth. It doesn't really lend itself to real dialogue, but I'm open to having a conversation with you longer. I have lots of ideas on things. I've been around, and you have my commitment to always be available for those conversations.
So, I questioned Secretary Yellen one time. I'll never forget when she responded, and I think it's such an easy way to grasp tax policy. Prior to the TCJA, taxes among many businesses were around the 35% range. We lowered them to 21. It's easy to just split the difference. Do you have any specific analysis that can point or prove that raising the corporate tax rate in this current environment won't impose burdens on low and middle income Americans and won't be putting our companies at a disadvantage globally by raising that tax rate up 7%?
So thank you, Congressman. One, you know that we used to have about 2% of our GDP from corporate tax rates. We're down about 1%. Other global economies that are in our peer group have about 3% of their GDP from corporate tax rates. So we believe we are underachieving in corporate tax rates. We also have to remember something Secretary Yellen has worked on, the global tax minimum. Some countries have actually taken us up on that proposal. Our budget asked Congress to do that. We believe it prevents companies from looking to offshore to hurt our American workers. And countries have signed on and done that to make sure you can't just go to a third country and hide from your tax obligations. So we think those proposals mean we ensure that our corporations don't offshore, which they're doing today, and they pay what they're supposed to, and we bring our corporate tax rates as a percentage of GDP back to its historic norm, not even what other countries are doing.
My biggest fear of this is this just becomes an arbitrary number and let's just split the difference. And I know there's industry out there that skirt by and that others are going to be hit really hard with a 28% tax increase. And these are good, hardworking American brick and mortar type companies that will drastically be affected. I want to just ask one more thing. 99% of businesses are categorized as small businesses, 500 or fewer employees. They do their taxes, though, oftentimes on an individual basis. Raising the tax rate to exactly 39.6%, will that affect these small businesses if that's how they do their taxes, and so many companies do?
We don't believe so. And speaking of this president's policy over the last 3 years, he is committed to small businesses. We believe his policies are the reason we've seen over 16 million new business applications filed during his first 3 years. And we're committed. Our SBA budget speaks to this. I know you're short on time. I won't go into our proposals, but we are truly committed. You're absolutely right there. The backbone of our economy. What we're talking about is going after those high-value, high-earning corporations, not small businesses.
We are on a strong economic recovery, but we still have TCJA in place. And I want to just make sure that point is made. That can't be overlooked. Thank you, Chairman. I yield back. Apologize for going over.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, thanks. The gentleman from Kansas is recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Director Young, I want to thank you for being with us here today to answer our questions and try to provide some insight into the President's budget request. Before I talk about some of the budget things I want to talk about, I wanted to correct the record on something. I guess you'd stated to Representative Klein that the President would not sign a bill raising taxes on those making under $400,000. But President Biden has already signed a bill raising taxes on those making under $400,000. In fact, according to the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act raised taxes on those under $400,000 by over $4 billion. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this letter from the Congressional Budget Office dated August 25th, 2022 to Ranking Member Kevin Brady and Ranking Member Jason Smith.
Without objection, so ordered.
It's not really a concern that some of my Republican colleagues have major concerns about the proposal we're talking about today. From the anti-growth tax increases to expanding the D.C. bureaucracies. There's a lot for us not to like in the budget. But I want to focus my questions on something that, at least outside the hearing, is something I think there's bipartisan support that's certainly growing, and that's namely addressing our fiscal crisis and where we are. Director Young, I'm sure you're aware that our country's borrowing roughly $95,000 a second. And that's more than the median income of an individual in Kansas and for the household income. And so, in just literally 1 second, the federal debt increased $95,000. And Democrats and Republicans all agree this is dangerously unsustainable. And I'm part of a bipartisan group that's working to address this. And even some of my colleagues on the other side of the dais have talked about this devastating problem. Yet in the President's budget request, there's not really any meaningful way to address this crisis. Even worse, the President's proposed tax increases, which aren't even offsetting the new spending that he's proposing. And it seems like the plan is to have a continued deficit and continuing growing that debt. I know that sometimes in the D.C. doublespeak, it's easy to say that the President likes to talk about his deficit is reduced. In reality, though, just because you propose a large deficit that's less than a larger deficit that had been proposed before, that's not a cut. It still increases the debt. And in fact, our national debt's going to increase to $52.7 trillion in 10 years based on this budget from a already staggering $34.5 trillion. So where, can you help with us, help understand where the president's priority are on our fiscal health of the nation and particularly why he didn't propose balancing the budget if we truly do have a strong economic recovery?
Congressman, one, I want to make sure we are not conflating deficit and debt. The president has, in fact, when he began, the deficits are over $1 trillion lower than when he began.
Yeah, but let's not confuse the COVID spending that Republicans and Democrats agreed to for that disaster. And, you know, when I look at, so if we take out COVID and we take out the extra spending there, and we just look for the next 10 years from what the President Biden has proposed, it actually is increasing the debt. So he's spending more money every year than he's bringing in.
Well, Congressman, from the amount that was being spent, outlays in the government when this president took office to now, there has been over $1 trillion of deficit reduction. I appreciate you don't want to count that base because we're in the middle of COVID, but just as you don't want to do that, I don't want people to forget where we were. And he led a successful vaccine campaign and ensured that we had one of the strongest economic recovery than any other major economy in this world.
Wow. He was the beneficiary of the Operation Warp Speed that President Trump put in place, and that started rolling out before President Biden came into office and was actually helping make that economy get started. And I think we can all agree, even Alexander Hamilton brought up that, you know, the necessity for borrowing during a particular emergency cannot be doubted. But I'm just looking forward. I mean, over the next 10 years, the president looks and proposes increasing our debt instead of lowering our debt in what's supposedly strong economic times.
Yeah, in 5 seconds, I'll say he has shown a path. I get there's disagreement on how we get there by asking the wealthiest to pay more, showing a path to over $3 trillion of deficit reduction. And the risk is, you've asked me about a balanced budget, the risk is that programs like Social Security, like Medicare, like Medicaid, like the Affordable Care Act, those are where the government has most of its outlays. If you want to balance in a short amount of time, there's no other place to go but for those to come down.
Yeah, and I know my time's run out, but the debt does increase. That's the fact of the matter is the President Biden's budget proposal is going to increase the debt over the next 10 years. And unfortunately, my time's run out. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Minnesota. 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Director Young, thank you for being here. I just wanted to point out a couple of things. President Biden's budget seems to really cater to the fringes of the party without taking into consideration what's best for the American people. And just this week, the EPA announced a new rule effectively forcing consumers to buy electric vehicles over gas. And it's flawed for so many reasons. And I'm from a rural area. And, you know, first of all, the electrical grid may not be able to handle all of these changes. It will increase our reliance on China as they control the EV battery and mineral supply chain. The auto industry made it clear that this plan is going to hurt them. And this kind of switch may actually be nearly impossible for rural America, where people regularly drive long distances and there are fewer charging stations, and there's a real concern about the performance of the batteries in cold weather. We saw that not that long ago. So I'm just kind of curious as to how much of the funding in the president's budget between the increases for the EPA and the Department of Energy will be used to produce agency rules that remove everyday consumer goods, such as the gas-powered cars, gas stoves, and gas furnaces from the marketplace, because it really seems like there's been a lot of rules that are affecting people like with those kinds of things.
Congresswoman, the bill released last night that hopefully you'll be voting on Friday, I think speaks to the fact that no one is going to be banning gas stoves. As far as
Okay, well then take that part of it out of it. Say, okay, so what are the rules going to be on the cars? We'll take the gas stoves out, gas furnaces.
well, EPA finalized, I think you're referring to the tailpipe rule. Now, let the EPA administrator speak to the details of the tailpipe rule, but from an investment standpoint, ensuring that communities have the charging stations they need to make this transition, because we believe climate change is an existential crisis to the budget. Look how much we spend on disasters, that we are putting the infrastructure in place in order to support more electric vehicles to ensure that we do something about climate change.
But does it address at all those issues that I mentioned? Driving long distances, the performance of a battery. I mean, I saw it on the news 2 months ago, I think it was, where these batteries were not performing and people were being stuck and they couldn't get them charged. And there are huge issues with those, but these departments, and the question was about how much are they going to commit to those, writing these rules? And maybe, maybe you just talk about in general, because there's been just a proliferation of these rules that are banning things and really getting at things because obviously they can't get them passed through Congress.
I just think what I said is if the questions are specific on tailpipe rule, I will let EPA explain its own rule. But I will say, as far as infrastructure, we do have budget space through the Inflation Reduction Act to make sure we have the infrastructure to deal with those issues you just pointed out, people who need more charging stations. I'm also from a town of less than 2,000. We want to see that infrastructure. Rural communities should not be left behind. Last time I went to my home state, I saw charging stations in places, frankly, I never thought I'd see charging stations in. So that work is happening all across this country. There's more to do, and we're committed to making those investments.
Will there be, I mean, in the budget that the president has proposed, does it allow, I mean, how much of it is going to be used to write those rules that infringe on people's ability to make consumer choices?
Well,
or any of the rules?
We don't believe our regulatory actions infringe. We think they improve different points of life for Americans. Specifically about tailpipe, we think it's going to lead hugely to the need to address emissions in this country, and I appreciate their difference of opinions, but also health outcomes of children who suffer from asthma. There's a reason the Lung Association and other healthcare organizations supported that rule. But agency budgets are in here that support rulemaking. EPA's operations account certainly supports employees who do that rulemaking. I have an office.
And I'm going to have to reclaim my time because I do have one follow-up question, and I'm almost out of time. I wasn't paying attention. How much, there's obviously these switches, whether it be gas stove, battery power, EVs. How does the president's budget account for the cost to the consumer, to those middle-class families? Because EVs are still very expensive. It could the cost of changing a stove over or any of those items is expensive. And how do we account for it?
Yeah, no one has any intention of banning gas stoves.
Okay,
But
the other programs.
Yes, but that is why the Inflation Reduction Act provided tax credits for Americans who want to buy.
But if they can't even afford it, if they can't begin to afford it, I mean, the tax credits are one thing, but they can't even start to afford these things. And I don't understand how we are going to continue to impose these ridiculous rules and things on people. But I am